Welcome to the Red Roof Recovery Show, a program to soften the path of recovery from substance and behavioral addictions. I'm your host, Tanya MacIntyre. And I really appreciate you spending the next 30 minutes with me as I share my experience, strength, and hope that I have acquired over the years through my own recovery from drugs and alcohol. First, I want to recognize and thank my friend, my mentor, a very talented singer, songwriter, musician, Russell Allen Scott. He has granted me permission to use this beautiful instrumental theme song, and it's titled Greatest Bravery. Thanks so much for this, Russell. Joining me on this episode of the Red Roof Recovery Show is Deborah Logue. She is the Executive Director of Victim Services Huron County, which helps victims of trauma, crime, and other tragic circumstances, including human trafficking. Welcome to the Red Roof Recovery Show, Deborah. I have been so looking forward to having this conversation with you. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be invited. I'm happy to share my knowledge and information with you today.
Excellent. Deborah, I was absolutely shocked, flabbergasted to find out that human trafficking is even an issue in a small place like Huron County, a rural farming community for the most part. How the heck does that happen?
You keyed it up perfectly there by saying the small farming community, because we live in a false sense of security because we're rural and we tend to know our neighbors and we tend to know what's going on and we're up in each other's business. But unfortunately, we get secretive and we get ways of hiding things. And the social media platform is such a contributing factor to recruitment that our individuals that grew up in this community that have that false sense of safety and trust of people that maybe you wouldn't trust so much if you're raised in a urban center, are more apt to add people to social media that they may not know 100%. They might be a friend of a friend. And then that gives access to someone trolling all of your personal information and gathering data about you so that they can track you and they can get to know you, and then they can falsely present themselves in your life all digitally, and you're not really any the wiser because you've let them in somehow, through that social media. So then that's where a lot of our recruitment in our region comes from, is that girls and boys will be groomed from here, recruited from this region, and then they get transported, they end up voluntarily going with this person that's groomed them to larger areas, and that's where the trafficking actually takes place. I can't say it doesn't happen here actually, but it is more of a recruitment land, our region. But again, in summers, the 21 corridor is a busy tourist highway, especially pre-COVID, and hopefully post-COVID that'll come back. But trafficking in Ontario is a lot known as the 401, like it's on the 401 corridor. But we are human trafficking in Canada, 80% of human trafficking is in Ontario. So you think of how large our country is, and that this horrific crime is happening, majority of it is happening in Ontario. So that's a rude awakening stat to keep in mind.
That is a very sobering thought for sure. And, I can certainly relate with the frustrations of being young and living in a small town. So I was born and raised in a small coal mining community on the east coast of Nova Scotia. And of course, all of my friends and I, all we talked about was leaving. We wanted to go and get away to the city, right? Yeah. And then, of course, it didn't help that I had a biology teacher in grade school who actually said, I guess all you girls who haven't found yourselves a husband yet will be going on to university. Right? And it's like, oh my gosh. Well, unfortunately, it was kind of true, right? I mean, we were all kind of thinking, do we find a husband, settle down, have kids? And a lot of my high school friends ended up pregnant final year of school, and kind of, that fate was chosen for them.
That's those prejudices coming into place and stereotyping and assumptions that are being made, and we're judging people based on our history and what we think should happen and
right.
the way we were raised. And it's just not. I hope to goodness we can get past this and broaden our horizons to have non-judgmental assumptions about people's career paths and what we can do with ourselves in our life.
And what's expected of us, exactly. As young people. I mean, we've got dreams and aspirations that we often feel and are told can't be met in a small town as well, right?
And all of that information also comes from media too, right? So when you think about human trafficking, if we're just talking about that specifically, people think of the movie Taken, that international or women being shipped over in shipping containers from another country and being trafficked here. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does. But again, high percentage of victims trafficked in Ontario are born and raised Ontarians. So it's not coming from another country. So it's just really, it's the vulnerable sector that gets targeted and taken advantage of. And that dream or that picture or those expectations are painted glowingly and in a beautiful way and Hollywoodized, for lack of a better term. And it's just not true. When they actually get into it, they realize it's not. By that point, it's too late. So,
And the majority of people who are recruited are female.
Majority are, yes, but it does impact male population as well. And we're talking sex trafficking. There's labor trafficking and other forms of trafficking too that is also come into it. So when I was specifically talking those stats, that was sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to be, because I'm a little naive when it comes to this. Other than traveling to Amsterdam and sitting in a bar watching the red light district as it was promoted to us as tourists, and seeing women on display in class windows and men literally going over and knocking on the door, and you'd see her get out of the window and go to the door, open the door, they'd do their little, and then it's like it was amazing, like you could time it. It was very sad and fascinating at the same time.
The difference with that, though, is it's legalized prostitution.
Legal.
So the woman actually receives the funding, whereas human trafficking, the person that's running her receives the money and she doesn't actually get any money. So that's the difference between prostitution and trafficking, that she's not paid directly and doesn't actually get benefit herself from the transaction that takes place.
So she is basically herded like cattle and forced to have sex with paying customers, and then housed in
unfavorable conditions sometimes. But that forced is perception, right? So forced does not mean at gunpoint or knife point. It's much more a high-end manipulation and emotional game that's played to make the individual feel like they don't have a choice, or that they're in love with their trafficker. The majority of our trafficking that we see is it's a Romeo pimp, Romeo trafficker, not the guerrilla trafficker. The guerrilla trafficker does tend to be in the more urban centers, and that's more gang affiliation and weapons related and more by force, physical intimidation. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in Romeos too, but the Romeo trafficker grooms the victim to believe that they're their partner and that they're doing this together as a team. And she's making profits for them as a couple to be able to live in that white picket fenced house and have those kids down the road. And addictions play a big part into that, because people that are being mistreated tend to use substances to numb that pain or to zone out when the transaction's taking place. That way, a way to cope. Addictions plays a big role in that. But addictions can also become leverage. So you get someone addicted, then you need to get that fix, or you need to have that feeling again. You'll do almost anything for it, which makes a transaction doable. And then you get rewarded by he'll keep you addicted to move forward. So not only are you, when you leave a trafficking scenario or leave domestic violence relationships in these scenarios that we're talking about, you have to leave the person that's supposed to love you and take care of you and provide for you, but it's also your use, providing your substances. So you're really leaving everything that you know behind to go, and you've been isolated from your family. You'll have been cut off from people that you know and people that you love, and they'll beat you down in respects to physically, like mentally, to make you feel like you're worthless and that you have no value and nobody's going to believe you and you're a liar. Like all the things that mental manipulation is incredible, that the woman doesn't feel that she can leave, because this is all I know. And if I do this better, he's going to love me again and I'm going to be able to get back there. And like I said, the addictions plays in. It's a vicious cycle. And it's very hard to leave, because that hold that person has, it's not just that physical intimidation and fear of being hurt. It's the fear of not having anybody to care about you or anybody to feed you. Because they do get their basic needs met. Like they're not fed well, but they'll get some food and they'll be clothed. Again, not the clothing that any other normal person would be wearing. It'll be scantily clad, advertisement type clothing for the business, but it's still something. They're still getting gifts given to them. They're still being fed a little bit, and they're still housed to a certain extent. So some people with their vulnerabilities are large, like homelessness is a big factor, addictions is a big factor. Sometimes the devil you know is better than the one you don't. So some people stay in not the best scenarios because the alternative is even scarier. So it's a very hard cycle to break and build that trust with the victim to know that there's something better and that they deserve better and they're worthy of better, because they've been downtrodden by the comments and the way that this person's treated them. So it's, and again, like I said, we're talking about addictions and how that plays into it. That's a big thing, to be able to leave that behind and go clean and live with the trauma of what's happened to you for whatever length of time that's happened.
Exactly. So, you reach a point where you think, if I'm not doing this, what will I do?
That's
and
right.
who will I be? And who's going to love me?
What is my identity? What do I... And a lot of people don't realize they're being trafficked per se, because again, this person started out as their boyfriend or started out as their partner. We've had people that their husbands have been their trafficker. So they're actually married. They have children. Like, it's there's no cookie cutter client profile here. Like, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's story is a little bit different, but there's themes that run through them. And like I said, that manipulation and the emotional warfare that happens is a constant theme that we see in almost every case.
So I'm presuming that isolation is a factor. So it's not like you would have, 2 or 3 or 4 women sharing a room and being farmed out.
Yeah, absolutely, you could in the urban centers.
Okay.
Absolutely, a trafficker could have multiple girls. They call it a farm, and multiple girls in their stable. This is the language that they use when they're speaking about this, and they could be in the same room. It is, but again, it's the mental status of that individual and what they believe and what they see is happening doesn't always align with those of us that aren't involved, right? Like, we see it a certain way, but them that are in it, they see it differently, and the coping mechanisms and the resiliency that they have to survive those things, what they convince themselves in their brain to be able to get up the next day and keep doing this is whatever they have to do. Do you know what I mean? So for us that aren't in it, it's very difficult to understand that, but they're surviving. Like, they're doing what they have to do to survive.
And you made a mention of social media. So obviously, I think technology is playing a huge part of.
So we've had quite a bit of concern with the pandemic that's been going on because of so many kids online, with school being online now and all your social interactions are online, that we were trying to really push that education component that we give, just to make awareness around privacy settings and how letting somebody in thinking that they're friends of a friend, that it's okay. They're not always who they say they're going to be. And it's very easy to put out fake profiles and gather and promote wrong information that convinces you they are somebody that they aren't. And that's a slippery slope. And then they start convincing you to share pictures or to meet. And like, it's dangerous. Social media can be dangerous if you don't have somebody helping you monitor and have your privacy settings, especially when you're a young person.
So you mentioned common themes. So would there be a prime age, like as young as 12?
12 to 18 would be the prime age, but we know people that have been in it and they're in their 20s and 30s, but you usually aren't recruited at that age. You usually are recruited quite a bit younger. I know of an individual that was 12. Again, in our area, it's not quite as prominent to be that young, but it's a risk factor. So when you look at what the risk factors are, it's the individuals that may be from broken homes or unstable home environment, or parents are working 2 jobs to make ends meet. There's just a lack of supervision, that type of thing, that the kids are looking for attention or love in the wrong places and just reaching out, and then get caught up into some of that stuff that makes them more vulnerable, more susceptible. Any kind of mental health challenges, any kind of addictions challenges at that age, socioeconomical challenges, so money, because they start getting your nails done and get your hair done and buy in the newest iPhone. Like, they'll lure you in with enticement of nice things. So if you can't afford that on your own, it's a leverage piece. And when you're 12 and 13 years old, your brain is not developed to process this information and to look at to think sensory of what this person might have an ulterior motive. It's like, oh wow, someone's giving me something, thanks for that, and they take it at face value. And that's just a brain cognition thing. You don't have the physical ability to be an adult brain at 12. You just don't. You're not that old. You're not that mature. You haven't had the life experiences. So they just don't see it as risky as a parent. And if they don't have parents that are home because they're working or they're busy or they're just whatever it is, like life is different, then they don't have anybody to talk to and ask this. And then we might turn to chat lines and other things that people can be posing, or gaming systems. People that are those live gaming things that you're playing with people all over the world. You have no idea who you're actually playing with. Like, it's a profile that's been set up, and people can lie about their age and put up a fake picture. And do you know what I mean? They can paint a whole image that's not necessarily true. But if we don't censor that, if we don't look beyond and think, oh, maybe this isn't accurate, we're a trusting community. We believe, we want to think the best of people, that they have good intentions. And unfortunately, not everybody does. I'm not saying everybody doesn't, but not everybody does.
I don't think it's any coincidence that, all the CEOs and high-tech companies like the Facebooks and the Twitters and stuff, they don't allow their children
on those
any
platforms
screen time at
That's
all.
right. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a very valid reason for that. And I can't even imagine being brought up in the age of technology.
Well, you see those commercials now when you see how we knew we were at your friends as the bikes were outside.
That's right.
That's how you knew where all your friends were. Whereas now it's geotagging and your like Snapchat mapping, and that's how you find your friends nowadays. That's wasn't our generation, but it's different worlds. We have to, as parents, we need to adapt and embrace what the new world is, because that's what our kids are living. So as parents, I strongly encourage you, know what platforms your kids are on, check into them, know their friends, get them to invite their friends over. Like, don't be adding people that you don't know that because a name sounds familiar. Like it's, do your diligence and investigate who is talking to your kid.
Well, my father, when I was growing up, I was raised by a single father, challenged by his own addictions and workaholic as well. But he always said, we become the company we keep. So he made sure that we were at home entertaining our friends, because he wanted to know where we were and who we were with.
It's so important to be personal, and we're moving further and further away from that mentality the more and more that digital takes over, right? How many times do you have conversation and it's a text, like as opposed to, or an email, as opposed to actually picking up the phone or going over to someone's house and talking to them, right? It's getting more and more acceptable. And again, COVID has added even more to that, because every meeting I'm on now is electronic, and there's just less of that face-to-face contact. But it's so important to have your finger on your kid's pulse of who they're talking to and what they're doing and what gaming. Like, even like I said, don't let them go off and play Xbox Live without kind of knowing who's on the other end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's key for sure. So I'm just wondering if, as I'm a relative newcomer to the Huron County region. And, I hear people talking about, so many issues: homelessness, addictions, mental health issues, and the lack of services. And you know firsthand, because that's your line of work. You are basically talking to people who are in a crisis situation and trying to get them the right services at the right time. How does that work in a small community like this?
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's tough. It's a challenge when we're in rural communities. There's just limited options. It's ideal if the individual has transportation abilities, because we can get to neighboring and get supports outside of the region if we need to. But if the individual doesn't have transportation, that's a secondary challenge, because we don't have public transportation. So, but our stakeholders in Huron County are pretty supportive of each other, and we pull together and we try to figure out plans, and we'll look at a case file together and try to really brainstorm our funding options and our abilities of what can you do and who can take the lead on this. And we strategize around a wraparound approach to get the best services for our clients. So we do try very hard in our areas. Everybody knows everybody that works here. Like, I don't think there's any agencies I don't know certain people at. Might not know everybody, but I'll know somebody that works at another agency, so that you use those personal connections to pick up the phone and say, hey, this is the scenario I'm running through. Do you have any suggestions? Can you think of anything that I can't think of? And work, relying on each other to try and flush out whatever resources we do have. And then, like I said, our neighboring counties that might have a little bit more in a little more urban setting, getting the client to those sites if we need to, right? If we have to, but those are not ideal. It's much nicer if we can keep them in our community and go to them, ideally even more so than making them have to go anywhere, because they're already dealing with something. Like, for us, our clients already had something terrible happen to them. Like, either it's a crime or a tragedy, something that's not a feel-good moment has taken place, which is why we're involved. So to then on top of them have to search out supports and travel to them and find where that is, it's just an added complication and even more stress to that family. And then if you have to get childcare on top of it, so that the adults can go have the meeting, but the kids stay home, then you're looking at babysitting. Like, it compounds the issues, right? So it's being aware of what those are, and then trying to find paths to mitigate them. So we're big use of taxis. We big use of to help get to people to things when they need to, or we have volunteer drivers and stuff like that too that can help out just getting people from point A to point B in those circumstances, right?
So we're living in this time of a pandemic that none of us expected to drag on as long as it has. And homelessness is a growing concern and getting worse during the pandemic, as is I think addictions, our suicide rates have tripled. And everyone I talk to, primarily my world is all about addiction recovery. But the huge thing is the lack of affordable housing. And that doesn't seem to be getting any better anywhere. So how is Huron County dealing with that challenge here?
We have homelessness initiatives in place, like from on a municipality level, that they're building additional units and more housing for the region. But unfortunately, that's not quick. And we have an a seasonal shelter for men, and we do have a women's shelter, domestic violence women's shelter for women. So we do have some resources and some housing options, and but really, it's looking at why is the individual homeless to begin with? Like, what is the root cause of that? And if we can start addressing. So if it is because trauma happened and then addictions kicked in and then that they lost their housing, because if you don't deal with the initial cause of why they've lost their housing to begin with, then they may repeat that same cycle and if they get housed again, right? So it's sustainability of housing, not just housing in general is limited here, but sustainable housing for the individual to be able to sustain it and stay there and pay it and manage it. And that there's more work to be done in that sector, which again, our community has been great. They've hired some staff in that field that will be helping individuals with when they leave the shelter, sustaining their housing options and looking for housing options. So we do have some work happening here, which is fantastic. I commend that to the ones that funded those programs. But it's going to be a long road. There's no quick fix, right? So unfortunately, in the meantime, while we're getting our options ducks in a row and getting things laid out, the individual may be couch surfing or living rough if they don't have other options, right? If they've lost family options and those types of things. So there's no pretty easy answer for this. Unfortunately, it's a process that takes time, and Huron County is doing something about it. We're moving towards making change and sustainability. So that's kudos to our community for trying what we can do, but it's just being realistic as human beings that it takes time for that stuff to get ironed out, right, and finalized and in place and the processes, but we're at least moving in the right direction.
You made mention of stakeholders, so I think that's key as well, these partnerships that you have.
So making that connection to the client so that it's not just one service. They're not just coming. So Victim Services is a referral-based organization. So when they come to us, it's our job to find the right referral for that individual to help move them through long-term care of healing of whatever it is that they've gone through. So it's not, we don't necessarily do the service itself. We don't have come sit on my couch and tell me your story and I'm going to counsel you, but we'll find you a counselor and we'll make that connection and we'll help support financially to cover that with the government assistance that we have access to. So it's really, we really have our finger on a few pulses as our agency because that's our mandate. We refer versus other stakeholders. They have their mandates that type of client population meets their needs and that's where they go. But we've been working hard, especially during COVID, to branch out those connections to make sure. So if it's at the shelter will then contact if they're struggling with addictions, Choices for Change would be involved, or if there's children, Rural Response for Healthy Children, or Children's Aid Society, or like it's making those other supports aware, the client aware of those supports, and doing the introduction and that soft handoff so that they are comfortable with whatever service we're being referred to, right? Because there's nothing worse than being a victim of something and you get bombarded with a whole slew of resources thrown at you. And then as a partner, you're like, oh my God, what do I do with all this info? Who do I call? When do I call them? Who's it the right fit? So that's where we can help navigate that. And there's also a mental health navigator position in Huron County that helps people through the hospital system. And we have court support help. So there is services out there, but if you don't reach out, you're not going to know about them. So that's the ticket for all of our stakeholders that we need to make sure we're informing the client that there's resources and how to reach them, but don't bombard them with 500 options because then it's another difficulty to figure out who you call when.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily the lack of resources. It's the matter of going to a referral agency like Victim Services to say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. Where do I start?
It's finding the right fit for that scenario. What is the best resource to start with? Because again, it's baby steps. Change and healing takes time. So and prioritizing what is the focus for that client right now, right? So we might think it's housing is the priority, but their priority is food, or their priority is addictions, or we need to go with what the client wants to do and what their healing journey looks like, and not make assumptions and stereotypes or judgments based on what we think they need. It needs to be what they feel is. Like I said, that root trauma needs to be ideally addressed before we can actually make change long term.
Yeah. So the judgment piece is huge. And of course, I come across that in my addiction recovery work all the time. The stigma, the societal stigma it doesn't seem to be alleviating. And, that's tragic, because that's what kind of brought me out of the closet, that we need to start talking about addictions and recovery and mental health disorders, because it's not what we assume it is.
And we need to make it okay for someone to come out, like to come forward and ask for help. And if we make judgments or we make stereotypes or we have assumptions made, why would anybody want to come and talk to you if you're going to make an assumption about you because you have an addiction issue? You know what I mean? Like if you're already coming in as a worker with a preconceived notion of what this person needs or what they want based on what you might know of their addictions history, you're not helping them. You're making it harder for them to actually seek that help because they're not feeling welcome. They're feeling judged or criticized for the choices that they've made. Like, we don't know what causes people to turn to whatever device they need to do to survive. Like I said, the amount of resiliency and skills it takes to survive being trafficked and come out of that is astronomical. I have no idea what that story would be like. I haven't been trafficked myself, so I don't know what it takes to be able to go through that. But I can imagine it's terrible and it's really hard. So, and then we go to the client. What do you need? What is it that's your priority? How can we be helpful? And really exploring that from their perspective, as opposed to making assumptions. Oh, it must be this that you need, or that. It's not our place to make that choice for the person.
Well, a very wise man who I have lovingly called Philosopher Dad many times on this show always said, for humanity to evolve, the conversation must deepen. So thank you for deepening the conversation, Deborah.
For letting me. I appreciate the time to share these stories.
I really appreciate you coming on and speaking with such clarity and authenticity around this problem that I was shocked to learn is so prevalent in rural communities. So yeah, kudos to you for educating our residents in these small communities.
If any of your watchers want more education, they could go to our website at victimserviceshuron.ca, and we have presentations on there that can educate them on all the things I talked, cyber safety and sextortion and human trafficking and all that kind of stuff is all on our website.
Fantastic. That is great to know. Thank you so much for being here today, Deborah. Deborah Logue is the Executive Director of Victim Services Huron County, helping victims of trauma, crime, other tragic circumstances, including human trafficking. So if you're a resident of Huron County needing emotional support and community referrals, please reach out, victimserviceshuron.ca. Thank you so much for investing your 30 minutes with us on the Red Roof Recovery Show, a program to soften the path of recovery from substance and behavioral addictions. If you would like to be a guest on the show, I would love to hear from you. redroofrecovery@gmail.com. Thanks so much for your time today. I hope our conversation has perhaps opened your mind a little bit to more empathy, compassion, and maybe inspired you to take some positive action whenever and wherever you can. Remember, let's talk to ourselves like we talk to our best friends. May the force be with you, and remember, you are the force. Thank you.